Hello everybody, I wanted to show you a flip through of a journal I just completed. I made this journal for Sharon and it's loaded, so I figured I couldn't do much with the pictures and I would do a video partly for you but partly so Sharon can see it. So beautiful cover, right? The mode in Dress and Home. I made this little tie just with some yellowish lace and some whiter off-white lace, and just added one of my buckles that I use quite frequently so that it can be expandable, which this one really needs to be because you can see it's very chunky. I kind of think I might have gotten a little carried away, but I wanted to fit in as much as I could. So love the cover. Inside we have some sweet ladies I cut out of patterns, and a card for another pattern for additional lingerie with some little, very delicate lace that you might use on lingerie, and some little embroidered flowers that you might also see on lingerie. So there's that. And avocado dyed paper and some coffee dyed paper in here. This lady, and actually was, this was all one picture, I just cut it apart, but it was the top of a antique box that I own. And I used some vintage black netting for the nylon, so I thought that that was appropriate with the hosiery pocket here. And then I've got these two ladies on this page from an antique newspaper, I believe these are from. And I made them into a bit of a pocket so things can be tucked in here. These ladies are from some vintage, I think they're embroidery booklets, if I remember correctly. So I copied them and I cut them out and I applied them to the page. I also added some very delicate embroidery from vintage hankies and made a pocket. And inside the pocket is a copy of this pattern. I love the graphics on these Art Deco pieces. So she just slips right in here. I have a couple mother of pearl buttons here. Couple more ladies from vintage patterns. I actually applied these to fabric so that they could be more of a 3D effect. So she's actually become a little bit of a tuck spot, and she's tucked into her is this lady with her beautiful legs. I wish I had legs like that. And this lady is also on fabric, so she's also very 3D. I made this little pocket out of some antique lace and a copy of an antique newspaper ad for patterns. And then this lady, she's also on fabric, so I just tucked her in so she can be moved around if somebody wants to move her around. Just a couple of very old coffee dyed pages, old looking. Some laces that you might use in your nightwear. So this is the copy of the cover of a needlecraft magazine. A couple little buttons here. And this is the same hosiery lady from back here. This is the actual ad that she appeared on. I just enlarged her and made a card out of her. $1, right. Here's another pocket with the other side of these ladies from the antique newspaper. This lady is copied off of the same antique embroidery negligee booklet from, I think it's from the early 20s. And I just put a piece of the actual wording from that booklet tucked inside there. Kind of a little bit of explanation of how to make them. More papers. I just tucked in this sweet little, it's not really vintage, but it's kind of vintage. I've had it for many years, but it's a needle book from Mary Englebright. I thought it fit nicely on these pages. Some more antique lace here. Some vintage fabric and vintage lace. And another lady that I glued to fabric, and it's a little bit of a tuck spot here. And I applied her on there. Just pages from an antique book on sewing. And then we've got the patterns for aprons. I love apron patterns. They always have so much personality. So the his with his hot dog, and I took the page off a piece off of a Bogart transfer pattern, added some rickrack. These ladies were off of this McCall pattern. I cut them out, and I cut out some pieces of vintage fabric that they might use for their aprons, as well as from a vintage hanky, this embroidery, like they might embroider on there. Probably because they've got embroidery on here. Some coffee dyed pages. This lady is the original piece out of an antique book, advertising book for patterns. And this is also from that embroidery book, the same one. And then this is cut out from that Bogart pattern, the little dogs, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then this is cut out from that same pattern, the delightful motifs for every day of the week. And these are also from that same pattern. The other side of that book page, and more of that vintage fabric, another little tuck spot here. And then this lady is from a pattern, and she, this is the back of the pattern. I cut her out onto fabric and added her here. And then some vintage fabrics, vintage laces, vintage buttons. Just what somebody might do to stash some samples for when they want to, what they want to use to make the dress on the pattern. I like that paper. It's so pretty, isn't it? And then these two ladies are also cut out from a vintage pattern. I glued a little flower from a vintage hanky to her hand there, and a piece of a vintage hanky on her dress to give it a little more dimension. I think they're so sweet. And then here's the school days, little school day girl. Some vintage fabrics and snaps and buttons for these boys for their outfits. And then this is a vintage needle book and a piece from Vintage Snaps. I love the graphics on that. So I tucked those inside of here. And then this I made the sample card. So I used some vintage fabric here, glued to a piece of cardstock. On the back is a pattern for little girls' blouses, and thought about them going to school, so I added some fabrics and buttons here that they might use to make the blouses. And my sample stamp, which I just love this sample stamp. I was so glad to be able to find it on Etsy. Lady was getting rid of some of her collection, so I just got very lucky. These little boys are so cute. And then this is my little sewing girl. I've made some cards out of her that I've had on my shop, but she's also on fabric. And then this sweet little girl that I use a lot, and this sweet little Valentine. So I made them into separate cards instead of making them into one journal card. And then these are also from a vintage pattern and fussy cut and applied to the page. This is a vintage embroidery pattern, and I just decoupaged it onto the page. Just the prettiest graphics. And then the vintage magazine cover, I just copied it, 1938. And this is an actual vintage tally card, not even used. Great graphics, right? So I tucked her in here. Love the look of her. And then this lady, I just made her this little pocket. I really love the graphics on this. This is an antique postcard that I purchased that had all this writing on it, so I just made a copy and made her into a journal card. I love when there's writing on the postcards. It just adds, so I don't have to, right? I don't have to stamp on it. So this is a piece of vintage fabric. I think somebody was making a quilt because it was cut out in the shape of a fan. So I used this and I folded it over, and I put these great copies from an antique sewing catalog, pattern catalog, and then I cut out a piece of fabric and applied it here as if it's a sample of what you might use to make the dress. So I tucked her in here, and another very similar card I tucked on the other side with another sample. And I used some different lace on this side. These wedding graphics, I found this at an estate sale, actually, that somebody was having. Actually, it was kind of a yard sale, and they had this picture. The entire picture actually is here. But actually it's not the entire picture because it doesn't have the kids on it. There's actually a bride, a flower girl and a ring bearer in the picture, but I blew it up a little bit. Well, I blew up what I had on my computer, but she's actually, I think I want to say like 8 by 10, or it's a pretty large size graphic, but I was really excited to find it at the sale. And I glued some antique silk from an antique silk dress that has this flower embroidery and some little pearls. And I did a little bit of texture paste and some stamping with add some more color around the edges. But on this side, I cut out a couple of the bridesmaids and applied them to fabric. And then the bride is here with her maid of honor on this little journal card. And on the back, there you go, there's the kids. So sweet. And then here's our embroidery lady. So I tucked her in this piece of very vintage embroidery. And I have my little embroidery girl here from an antique magazine glued to some fabric. And this is the cover from a April 1914 magazine. So she can just tuck in here pretty easily because she's so flexible. So I thought that was a nice place to tuck her in and show off some embroidery. Couple more ladies applied to a floral page here that I also made into a pocket. And then we've got our garden girls here. So we've got this little girl. And this is another cat magazine cover. And yet another magazine cover. I just love the look of this one. And the colors. I like to blow it up because I just love the colors. I should probably put the original in a frame. Here's our other little watering girl, and a little girl watering the flowers. And I added some flowers here on this little pocket that I made. And the other side of the pocket. These ladies patterned for their outdoor gardening attire and the aprons, and like we would, you know, it's amazing to me what they thought about wearing in the garden then. But I also took these ladies and cut them out and applied them to this pocket that I made out of a vintage I want to say it's a napkin because it feels too thick to be a hanky. But I love the colors look great with it. And then we've got this gardening lady here from a Life magazine. We're almost there. There's a lot in here. This lady is knitting and another magazine cover. And here's another lady knitting on another magazine cover. The old magazine covers are just so awesome. I've made journal cards out of this before, so these are the ladies. I think they must have like a crochet club, but the caption on this I just love. My wife is the only one that has no work to show. And I'm assuming it's this lady in the back, but who doesn't want to say something to the man that wrote this, right? So then this is from the front of a crochet magazine. And I actually cut out the lady on it and put her on fabric and reapplied her to give her some dimension. And then I glued down this directions for crocheting this piece. I found a box of these, and little by little I've been using them in different journals, but she actually typed out all the directions and applied samples of what she was giving directions for. So just a sweet piece. I thought it made a great background for this. And some pretty flower paper. And then in the back, we have these ladies that I cut out of that embroidery catalog also. And this lady's on fabric, so she's more three-dimensional. This lady's glued to the back page here in a nice lace pocket. So that is this big, very well-filled journal. And Sharon, I really hope you love it because I put my heart and soul into it. So I hope you enjoy it. It was fun putting some of this together for you. And everybody have a great day. Thanks.